The struggling cowboy stood frozen on the train platform as his paralyzed mail-order bride realized they were both victims of the same cruel joke. Dust swirled between them. The November wind carried laughter from across the street. Zeke Thornfield's hands hung at his sides like broken tools. 28 years old, and he'd never felt smaller. The woman in the wheelchair held papers that trembled despite her steady gaze. Her traveling dress was worn but clean, her spine straight as fence posts. Clayton Pemberton leaned against the general store, arms folded across his expensive vest. His brother Warren stood beside him, both watching like vultures circling wounded cattle. They'd orchestrated this humiliation with the precision of a cattle drive. The town gathered. Whispers spread faster than prairie fire. Someone had hung a banner reading, "Welcome Mrs. Thornfield," across Main Street. Part of the joke. Part of the cruelty that would follow Zeke to his grave. Cordelia Ashworth looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds. No tears, no pleading. Just the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned to carry disappointment like a winter coat. "You didn't write these letters." Her voice cut through the wind. "No, ma'am." She folded the forged correspondence with careful precision, each crease deliberate, each movement controlled. "Neither of us chose this." The crowd pressed closer, faces eager for entertainment, for someone else's misery to season their ordinary lives. Zeke felt their stares like brands on his skin. He looked at his wagon, looked at her trunk beside the railroad tracks, looked at everything except the Pemberton brothers and their satisfied smirks. "I can take you back to the station. Tomorrow." The words felt like swallowing glass. The eastbound doesn't run until spring. 4 months. 4 months trapped by circumstance and other men's cruelty. 4 months of a marriage that wasn't a marriage with a woman who'd answered an advertisement that was never written. Zeke lifted her trunk without asking permission. Heavy enough to hold a life's worth of possessions. Light enough to carry the weight of broken dreams. He secured it in the wagon bed with rope that had seen too many years of hard use. The ride to his ranch passed in silence. 20 minutes of rutted road and dying grass. 20 minutes of two strangers bound together by lies they'd never told. His house squatted against the horizon like an apology. Small, weather-beaten. The kind of place that made ambitious women reconsider their choices. Cordelia studied it without comment. Her expression revealed nothing. "It's not much." Neither was Boston, toward the end. He helped her down from the wagon. Her arms were stronger than expected. Scarred hands that spoke of work and determination. She maneuvered the wheelchair with practiced efficiency while he struggled with words that wouldn't come. Inside, the house felt smaller with 2 people. One room served as kitchen and parlor. A bedroom barely large enough for a single bed. Everything clean but worn thin as old leather. "I'll sleep in the barn." "That's not necessary." "It is to me." She positioned her chair near the window, studied the view of his failing ranch with the eye of someone accustomed to assessing difficult situations. His cattle were scattered across brown pasture. His fence posts leaned like tired old men. "How long do you have?" The question caught him off guard, direct as a winter wind. 60 days, maybe less. Before they take it." "Yes." She nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "The men who arranged this, they want your land." It wasn't a question. Zeke found himself studying her face. Intelligent eyes that missed nothing. A mouth that suggested she'd learned to hold her own in conversations with men who underestimated her. That evening, he brought her trunk inside, watched her unpack books and papers with the care of someone who valued learning above comfort. Medical texts, agricultural journals, teaching materials wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from rain and rough handling. "You were a teacher." "Was." She placed a faded photograph on the table, a schoolhouse with children arranged in careful rows. "Until the accident made me unsuitable for employment." The fire crackled between them. 2 people who'd lost everything they'd built. 2 people who'd answered an advertisement that never should have existed. Snow began falling that night. Early for the season, but not unexpected in Wyoming territory. By morning, it had covered the ground with the kind of white. That meant winter had arrived to stay. Zeke found Cordelia at his kitchen table, his father's papers spread before her like a battle plan. Account books, land surveys, correspondence with the bank that held his mortgage. "You've been overcharged for everything." He looked over her, shoulder at columns of numbers that might as well have been written in a foreign language. Letters that swam together like schools of fish. "I'm not much for reading." Her finger traced a line of his father's handwriting. "This survey mentions water rights. Natural springs on the eastern section. Springs that could mean the difference between a failing ranch and profitable land. Springs that could feed irrigation channels and green pastures. Springs that his father had noted but never explained to a son who couldn't read well enough to understand their significance. You think there's water out there? I think your father was a more careful man than his neighbors realized." Outside, the snow continued falling. Inside, two strangers began to see possibilities neither had imagined. The cruel joke that brought them together had revealed something the Pemberton brothers never intended: hope. The winter deepened around them like a slow embrace. Cordelia spread her father's botanical texts across the kitchen table each morning, cross-referenced soil samples with crop rotations, calculated water tables and growing seasons, while Zeke tended livestock that grew thinner by the day. She organized his accounts with the precision of a field surgeon. Each receipt examined, every payment questioned. The pattern emerged clear as frozen ground. Pemberton Supply has been charging you double market rate for feed. Zeke studied the columns of numbers that finally made sense under her careful explanation. His jaw tightened. The systematic bleeding of his resources had been deliberate, calculated, a slow strangulation disguised as business. Miller's bank advanced the Pembertons' credit to buy out struggling ranchers. Her finger traced loan documents. Your mortgage holder answers to them. The web of control spread wider than he'd imagined. Not just market manipulation, but financial strangulation. A patient campaign to acquire his land through manufactured desperation. Days shortened into routine. Cordelia managed correspondence and planning while Zeke worked the physical demands of the ranch. He built a ramp to the front door without fanfare, widened the bedroom doorway without explanation, small modifications that spoke louder than words. Evenings found them by the fire. She read aloud from agricultural journals while he repaired tack and tools. Her voice carried the rhythm of someone accustomed to teaching. His hands moved with the economy of someone who fixed what broke, because replacement wasn't possible. Winter wheat tolerates cold better than spring varieties. She turned a page. Your father's notes mention success with Turkish Red. Never heard of it. Hardy strain. Developed for harsh climates. She looked up from the text. Like the people who plant it. Something passed between them in the firelight. Recognition of shared resilience. Acknowledgement of the strength required to endure what neither had chosen. The Pembertons' visits became more frequent, more pointed. Clayton arrived with offers dressed as concern. Warren brought documents that promised relief in exchange for surrender. Miss Ashworth. Clayton removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. I trust you're being treated with appropriate consideration. Cordelia's spine straightened. Her hands remained folded in her lap. I'm quite comfortable, thank you. A woman of your education surely recognizes this arrangement as temporary. Unfortunate circumstances that needn't define your future. My future is my own concern. Clayton's smile held the warmth of a winter wind. Of course. Though one wonders what prospects exist in such isolation. For someone with particular needs. The words carried poison wrapped in politeness. Zeke's fists clenched at his sides. Cordelia's expression never wavered. Mr. Thornfield provides everything necessary. After Clayton left, neither spoke of the conversation. The insults hung in the air like smoke from green wood. Bitter. Impossible to ignore. Zeke found himself studying Cordelia when she wasn't looking. The way she organized papers with surgical precision. How her eyes caught light when she explained agricultural theory. The quiet satisfaction she took in bringing order to chaos. She deserved more than a failing ranch and a man who could barely read his own mortgage papers. Deserved a life that didn't require her to fight for basic dignity. The knowledge sat in his chest like a stone. Cordelia watched Zeke work through frost-covered windows, noticed how he gentled spooked cattle with patience instead of force, how he shared his meager grain with birds that couldn't migrate south, how he carried water to livestock in weather that froze exposed skin. He deserved a partner who could walk beside him, who could bear children and tend a garden without mechanical assistance, who wouldn't require modifications to live in the world he'd inherited. The thought followed her through lengthening nights. Neither voiced what both understood. Spring would bring decisions that winter had allowed them to postpone. The town's whispers reached them through supply runs and necessary business. Conversations that stopped when Zeke entered stores. Glances that followed Cordelia during her rare appearances in public. The scandal of their arrangement provided entertainment for people whose lives offered little variety. Unnatural situation, Mrs. Henderson's voice carried across the general store. That poor girl trapped with a man she never chose. Should be annulled. Samuel Porter counted change with deliberate loudness. For her own protection. Zeke loaded supplies with mechanical precision. Each comment another weight added to shoulders, already bent under accumulated burden. Cordelia maintained her composure like armor worn thin from repeated battles. Warren Pemberton intercepted them outside Miller's bank. His approach carried the confidence of a man who held winning cards. Foreclosure proceedings begin in 30 days. He handed Zeke official papers. Unless payment is made in full. $800. More money than 3 good seasons might generate. More than a small ranch could produce without time to implement the changes Cordelia had planned. There are alternatives. Warren's tone suggested magnanimous consideration. My brother remains interested in purchasing. Terms that would provide both of you with fresh starts elsewhere. Cordelia accepted the papers from Zeke's frozen hands. Read them with the thoroughness of someone who understood legal language. Her face revealed nothing. We'll consider all options. That night she wrote letters by lamplight. Careful correspondence to contacts in Denver and Cheyenne. Inquiries about teaching positions. Requests for information about opportunities for educated women in growing cities. Zeke saw the letters but didn't ask their purpose. He understood survival when he saw it. Understood the necessity of planning escape routes when walls closed in. He considered his own options in the darkness before dawn. The Pemberton offer would clear debts and provide Cordelia with funds to establish herself somewhere that offered better prospects. Somewhere she wouldn't face daily reminders of a marriage that had never been chosen. The spring survey lay spread on the kitchen table between them. His father's careful notations marked water sources that could transform brown pasture into green abundance, could support crops that would feed communities instead of barely sustaining single families. If we had the time, Cordelia traced irrigation patterns with her finger. If we had the resources, if they had what they couldn't obtain, if they could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable, if the cruel joke that brought them together could somehow become the foundation for something neither had dared imagine. Outside wind scoured frozen ground. Inside, two people contemplated futures that seemed to require choosing between survival and hope, between practical necessity and impossible dreams. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, official correspondence, from Denver that made Cordelia's hands tremble despite her controlled expression. She read it twice before speaking. Someone wants to discuss our agricultural innovations. What innovations? The irrigation system, the crop rotation plans. She folded the letter with deliberate care. I may have understated our progress in my correspondence. Hope and deception tangled together in her words. The prospect of salvation balanced against the reality of promises they might not be able to keep. Another gamble in lives already shaped by other people's cruel wagers. Snow began falling again. Early spring snow that would melt fast but reminded them winter wasn't finished. Neither was the fight for everything they'd begun to build together. The stranger arrived with the first thaw. Edmund Whitmore stepped down from his hired carriage wearing clothes that cost more than most men earned in a year. His boots remained, unmarked by mud, his hands soft as prayer books. Cordelia's face went white as winter sky. Edmund. The name escaped her lips before she could recall it. Zeke understood immediately. The way she straightened in her chair. The way her hands found the armrests and gripped until her knuckles showed bone. This wasn't the Denver journalist she'd been expecting. My dear Cordelia. Edmund removed his hat with practiced grace. When I received your letter, I had to come immediately. His eyes swept the modest ranch house, catalogued the simple furniture and patched curtains, assessed everything with the casual dismissal of someone accustomed to finer things. Then his gaze found the wheelchair. The shock registered across his face before politeness could mask it. A moment of revulsion quickly painted over with manufactured concern. My God. You never mentioned. You never asked. Silence stretched between them like barbed wire. Zeke remained by the door, forgotten in the reunion he was witnessing. Cordelia sat motionless as carved stone. Edmund recovered his composure with the skill of someone who'd learned to navigate social difficulties through wealth and charm. The important thing is I've found you. I can take you away from all this. His gesture encompassed the ranch, the isolation, the circumstances that had brought her here. His offer hung in the air with the weight of financial security and social respectability. Away from what exactly? This unfortunate situation, this marriage of convenience that never should have occurred. Edmund's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to arranging other people's lives. I've spoken with lawyers. Annulment can be arranged quickly and quietly. Zeke watched Cordelia's reaction, waited for the relief that should have crossed her face. Instead, he saw something harden behind her eyes, something that had been tested too many times and refused to break again. You assume I want to leave? Surely you don't intend to remain here, a woman of your education, your background. Edmund glanced at Zeke with barely concealed disdain. You deserve better than this rough existence. The patronizing tone struck Zeke like a physical blow, not just the insult to his circumstances but the casual dismissal of Cordelia's ability to choose her own path. The assumption that she needed rescue from decisions she'd made with full knowledge of their consequences. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Edmund moved closer to Cordelia's chair. Away from present company. Anything you need to say can be said here. Edmund's jaw tightened, his carefully constructed approach meeting unexpected resistance. Very well. I'm prepared to pay all outstanding debts associated with this property. Provide you with funds to establish yourself properly in Denver or Boston. Ensure you never want for anything. The offer was generous, more generous than Zeke could match or counter. More than enough to solve every financial problem that kept them awake at night. More than enough to give Cordelia the life she'd lost when her father's investments failed. In exchange for what? Your companionship, your presence in civilized society where your talents won't be wasted on agricultural experiments and frontier hardship. Edmund's words painted a picture of comfort and security, of drawing rooms and cultural events, of a world where wheelchair accessibility wouldn't require rough modifications and careful planning, where Cordelia's intelligence would be appreciated in parlors instead of applied to irrigation systems and crop rotations. Zeke felt something breaking inside his chest. The growing connection between them was no match for practical reality. No match for the security Edmund offered. No match for the life Cordelia deserved. I need time to consider. Of course. Edmund's smile suggested victory barely postponed. I'll be staying at the hotel in town for several days. Perhaps you could join me for dinner tomorrow evening, away from these rustic surroundings. After Edmund left, the house felt smaller. The silence between them stretched taut as fence wire. Cordelia stared out the window at land that had begun to show the first hints of spring green. Zeke stood behind her chair, close enough to touch her shoulder but not daring to bridge the distance. He could give you everything. Could he? The question held depths Zeke couldn't fathom. Challenges to assumptions he'd been making about her wants and needs, about what constituted everything in a life that had already been broken and rebuilt. Once. Security, comfort, a place in the world that fits who you are. Who I am? She turned to face him. Do you know who that is? The question caught him unprepared. He'd been seeing her through the lens of his own inadequacies, his own certainty that she deserved more than he could provide. But sitting there, in the afternoon light surrounded by the agricultural plans they'd developed together, she looked complete in ways that had nothing to do with what Edmund offered. You're the strongest person I've ever known. The words surprised them both. Simple truth spoken without calculation or strategy. Acknowledgement of qualities that had nothing to do with walking or wealth or social position. That evening, the Pemberton brothers arrived unannounced. Clayton and Warren entered without invitation, their presence filling the small room with the confidence of men who'd never been denied what they wanted. Heard you had a visitor today. Clayton's tone carried casual menace. Man of substance from what folks are saying. Mr. Whitmore's business is his own. Business that affects this community's welfare becomes everyone's concern. Warren positioned himself near the door, especially when it involves dissolving unfortunate arrangements. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Community pressure, disguised as moral concern. Social expectations weaponized to achieve financial goals. Some situations resolve themselves naturally, Clayton studied Cordelia with eyes that held no warmth, when better alternatives present themselves. Miss Ashworth will make her own decisions. Will she? Clayton's laugh held no humor. Or will circumstances make them for her? After they left, Cordelia sat in the gathering darkness without lighting the lamp. Zeke waited nearby, respecting her need for silence while wrestling with his own growing certainty that he was losing something he'd never quite possessed. They'll call a town meeting. Her voice cut through the gloom. Make it a public issue. Force the community to choose sides. Let them. You don't understand. They'll frame it as protecting me from an inappropriate situation. Rally everyone's prejudices about the marriage and about my condition. She was right. The Pembertons would use Edmund's arrival to legitimize their campaign, transform their land grab into a moral crusade, turn the entire town against a relationship that had never been accepted. Maybe you should go with him. Is that what you want? The question hung between them in the darkness, heavy with implications neither had been willing to voice, loaded with feelings that had grown slowly through shared work and quiet evenings and the gradual recognition of partnership. I want you to be happy. That's not what I asked. Wind rattled the windows, carried the scent of thawing earth and the promise of spring planting, carried the possibility of harvest that might never come if they couldn't hold onto the land long enough to see their plans through. I want you to stay. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. God help me. I want you to choose this life we've built. Choose me. Silence filled the space between confession and response, filled the darkness with possibility and fear in equal measure. Then we fight for it. The town meeting filled the church to capacity, every pew crowded with faces that carried the hunger of spectators at a public execution. The Pemberton brothers flanked the pulpit. Edmund Whitmore sat in the front row, his presence lending weight to their orchestrated intervention. Clayton Pemberton rose with the gravity of a man delivering moral judgment. We gather tonight to address a situation that affects our entire community. The welfare of a vulnerable woman trapped in circumstances no decent person should endure. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded in agreement with sentiment that sounded righteous stripped of context. The setup was masterful, the conclusion foregone. Miss Ashworth deserves our protection, our intervention on behalf of someone who cannot advocate for herself in this unfortunate arrangement. Cordelia's hands gripped her wheelchair arms, her spine straight as a surveyor's rod. She'd dressed, in her finest clothes, her hair arranged with careful precision, armor for a battle she'd never chosen but would fight with everything she possessed. Mr. Whitmore has graciously offered to provide proper care and circumstances befitting a woman of Miss Ashworth's education and refinement. Edmund stood with practiced humility. His offer painted in colors of charity and moral obligation, his financial resources transformed into evidence of worthiness. Surely we can all agree that allowing this charade to continue serves no one's interests. The marriage should be dissolved for the protection of both parties. Warren Pemberton produced legal documents, annulment papers already prepared, financial arrangements that would clear Zeke's debts and provide Cordelia with a comfortable future. Everything wrapped in the language of community concern and moral duty. All that remains is Miss Ashworth's consent to this reasonable solution. The church fell silent, every eye fixed on Cordelia's face, waiting for her grateful acceptance of rescue from circumstances they'd decided she couldn't possibly want. She didn't stand. Couldn't stand. But somehow her presence filled the room with authority that had nothing to do with physical stature. I appreciate your concern for my welfare. Her voice carried to the back pews without strain. But I'm capable of making my own decisions about my own life. Uncomfortable shifting in the audience. This wasn't the script they'd expected. The grateful victim was supposed to accept salvation, not question the motives of her rescuers. You've been misinformed about my circumstances, about the nature of my marriage, about my feelings regarding both. She produced letters from her bag, correspondence that told a different story than the one the Pembertons had constructed. These are the original advertisements that brought me here, forgeries created as part of a cruel joke designed to humiliate Mr. Thornfield and force him to sell his land. Gasps echoed through the church. The narrative they'd been fed crumbled under the weight of documented deception. The same men who now claim to act for my protection orchestrated the circumstances they're using to justify their intervention. Clayton's face darkened. Whatever the origins of the arrangement, the current situation remains inappropriate, unsuitable for a woman of gentle breeding. Unsuitable according to whom? Cordelia's question cut through the murmurs. According to men who've decided what I should want without consulting me. She turned to face the crowd directly, met the eyes of people who'd been judging her situation from the safety of their own comfortable assumptions. I found purpose here, partnership, respect that doesn't depend on my ability to walk or conform to expectations about what makes a woman valuable. Edmund stepped forward, his patience finally cracking. You're being absurd, Cordelia. Look at your circumstances. Look at what you're defending. I'm looking at my choice, my life, my future with a man who sees me as a partner, not a project requiring rescue. The words hung in the air like smoke in still wind. Truth that couldn't be dismissed or reframed to serve other purposes. Zeke had remained silent through the proceedings, watching the woman he'd married defend their partnership with courage that shamed his own cautious nature. Now he rose from his seat in the back row. She's right. His voice carried the roughness of someone unaccustomed to public speaking. About the joke, about the land grab, about everything. He walked to the front of the church, each step deliberate, each word chosen with the care of someone who'd never spoken his heart in public. I love her. The declaration silenced the room, not out of pity or obligation or gratitude, because she's the strongest person I've ever known, because she chose to stay when she could have left, because she sees possibilities in broken things that others would discard. Edmund's face twisted with disgust. This is madness. Cordelia, you're throwing away security and comfort for what? A failing ranch and a man who can barely provide for himself? I'm choosing a life where I'm valued for my mind and my heart, where my contributions matter, where I'm building something worthwhile instead of being protected from the world. She turned to face Zeke. If you'll have me. If you'll accept a real marriage instead of the arrangement circumstances forced on us. The church erupted in whispers and exclamations. The public forum had become a stage for declarations no one had anticipated. Zeke knelt beside her wheelchair, took her hands in his work-scarred fingers. I'll have you, honor you, work beside you for whatever time we're given. Edmund stormed from the church, his exit carrying the finality of burned bridges and abandoned campaigns. The Pembertons followed, their faces dark with frustrated ambition. The crowd dispersed slowly, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others offering tentative congratulations, most simply confused by the turn of events they'd witnessed. Later, back at the ranch, Cordelia and Zeke sat by the fire. The spring evening carried the scent of new grass and the promise of planting season. Edmund left money. She handed him a bank draft. Not charity, investment in our irrigation project. He said he'd rather back someone with vision than retreat in complete defeat. The amount was enough to clear their debts, enough to fund the improvements they'd planned, enough to transform their desperate gamble into a viable future. Why? Pride, perhaps, or recognition that I'd found something he couldn't purchase. They worked through the summer like partners who'd been matched by choice instead of circumstance. The spring system they'd discovered fed irrigation channels that turned brown pasture into green abundance. Their crops flourished under careful tending and innovative techniques. Other ranchers began asking questions, seeking advice about water management and crop rotation. The knowledge Cordelia shared freely multiplied across the valley, creating prosperity that lifted entire communities. By autumn, their success was impossible to ignore. The struggling ranch had become a model for agricultural innovation. The mail-order bride had become a teacher whose influence reached far beyond their property lines. The Pembertons moved their operations to easier targets. Their systematic approach to land acquisition faltered against communities that had learned to cooperate instead of compete. 1 year after the cruel joke that brought them together, Zeke and Cordelia hosted a harvest celebration. The same people who'd once pitied them now sought their friendship and guidance. Evening found them in the garden they'd planted together. Cordelia transplanting seedlings while Zeke adjusted irrigation channels, their movements synchronized by shared purpose and deepening affection. The wheelchair tracks in the soft earth ran parallel to his boot prints. Two paths that had converged, by accident and continued by choice. The joke that was meant to humiliate them had become the foundation of something neither could have built, alone. They'd found love in the space between what others expected and what they chose to create, found strength in partnership that transcended the limitations others saw as insurmountable, found home in the decision to stay and fight for something worth keeping. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.